Today I have an important topic that I wish to share with all of you, and it has to do with the aspect of active listening and being able to perceive the will of God through what you hear. And not normally am I asking you just to use your ears, but also to open your mind to the possibility by which God is speaking to you in a voice that helps you to know what it is that you're struggling with. But before I get into that, let's just look at the passages that are provided for you today. Now, in the book of Acts, we have a primary character named Lida, or Lida, depending on your pronunciation. She is what they call a worshiper of God. Now, that phrase simply says this: she's Gentile, and she has tremendous sympathy for the monotheistic Judaic religion, in which you worship only one God. It's very uncomplicated, and she often goes where most Jews would go, where there would be no synagogue in Philippi, and that is down by the riverbank, because it is there that they can participate in the ritual cleansings that help them to find their healing and their wholeness in the community. Now, just to give you this information very quickly, Philippi is a principal district and capital city of Macedonia. And it is a city that is strictly of Latin background, which is the language of the Romans. And most retired generals or former soldiers often would be there in their retirement. So it was predominantly dominated by the Roman Empire and its force of will. And those who are not part of that particular ethnic group often found themselves not being able to hold worship in the appropriate places that they would like. And especially for those of Jewish background, they had to go to the riverbank as a result. Now, Lida, or Lida, however you wish to pronounce, is also a person who deals with purple dye and purple material. It's a rich material which only the upper class of Roman society would ever buy. So this is a woman of incredible wealth. And she goes down and has a discussion with this new teacher called Paul. And by listening to what he says, and through the questions that would also come out of her listening, she discovers a point at which she wishes to convert to the Christian faith at that time. Now, the book of Revelation is something entirely very different. The author tells us that he sees the New Jerusalem, a heavenly vision, coming down from the sky in which all peoples and all nations stream to this New Jerusalem. And it's lit not by the violence of the Roman Empire or of the Babylonian Empire. It is lit by the light of the Messiah, Jesus, who pays a compassionate act of suffering by which he has redeemed the world. And it's through this compassionate suffering that there is a light of reasoning, an ability to see and to hear to a deeper truth. Now, you'll also notice it talks about 12 trees. The word 12 is a sign of perfection. It also resembles the disciples. It also talks about the 12 tribes of Israel, which make the whole state of Israel itself. So 12 is a sacred number. It represents wholeness, perfection. And finally, in the Gospel of John, some strange words of Jesus, which Paul constructs, or I should say, which John constructs. And what he tells us is this: Jesus says, I'm leaving. And before I leave, I want to give you the Parakletos, the Spirit. The Spirit will lead you to the fullness of truth that you search for, provided you are able to listen to it. And part of listening to it is to have a relationship with the Father, with God. That relationship illuminates you to be able to see and to know and to incorporate and hear the values that your Father wishes you to live out. And it is the Spirit that will help you to decide. All right, the power of listening. My first simple point. And you're so lucky because I got home at 11:30 last night, so I'm going to be short. You learn by engaging in discussion, by entering into dialogue. And you don't just talk to people who think like you. You talk to people who are different from you because they look at you and see your life in a totally different context. And they bring their own prejudices, their own favors, their own sense of perspective around a particular issue. And I'm going to give you a very simple case in point. When I traveled with Kevin, I'm sitting beside a man who looks at politics very differently from me. And we argue back and forth on the highway. Now, when I say argue, it was social bantering. We teased, we kid. We both have great respect for each other. And while we were driving, we talked about taxation policy. And he gave this perspective, then I opened up a window on my perspective. And you know what? We both realized that we were both right. But he also said, in turning to me, I never thought about that before. And I thought, yeah, you haven't. Now, I am talking to someone that I have a relationship with. But I often find that on the political perspective, we have a different issue. Many times. But we tell each other what we think. We discuss taxation policy. We talk about whatever it is we wish to talk about. And in that engagement, a light goes on, an understanding of what to do. Another conversation we had to do with the direction of our church. We spent over 2 hours just talking about that. My perspective, his perspective, and where the church should go. But the Spirit was there, helping us to engage, to talk, to have an understanding. And so my only thing I want to say to you is always talk to people. Always learn from the lived experience of others and welcome them to say what they say, even if you think it's outlandish and you can't even come to an agreement. But the problem with our society is we go to the Twitter account of those we like to hear. We go to our computer and engage in those websites that support our view. We do not dare cross the field over to the other side because we don't want to be challenged. And part of living in this dynamic world we call life is you can't possibly have all the truth wrapped in your own perspective. That truth is also being carried by somebody completely different from yourself. And you have to have respect. You have to have a welcoming mind that is open to maybe changing your mind down the road. Lida, however you wish to pronounce her name, she is transformed. She has her social prejudice, but she hears Paul, she listens, she talks, and she's forever changed and is baptized. Number 2, pay attention to people who give suffering compassion to others. Pay attention to those who never say very much, but who give very much of themselves to others less fortunate. There's a lot to learn. What's happening in the book of Revelation is, because of the suffering compassion of Jesus, we have now this new horizon called the New Jerusalem. And we have no temple except God himself, because we are living in the light of God. And God's temple is in our hearts, not in a building of brick and mortar. How is that possible? Because with his compassion, he opened opportunities for others. Because he demonstrated his ability to be faithful and to be driven by his instinct, his gut, to lift people out of their waywardness. And our place in the church and outside the church is to carry that silent, compassionate act of suffering for others, so that we might be able to redeem one person at a time. And when you silently give of yourself to someone else, it is there that a new active listening occurs. But it's not by words, it's by action. And people will know that you are Christian by your love. So the hymn goes. So when you give generously of yourself, and if I or others pay attention to it, it gives us a signal in terms of direction. Let me give you a very simple case in point. I always wondered why this particular gentleman would arrange his garden a certain way. And one day, after Melissa and I were married, I said, "George, why do you put your garden this way?" And he explained it to me. And I said, "Well, that's kind of awkward." He says, "Yes," but he says, "Stand back and look at my yard from a distance." And all of a sudden my eyes saw his garden as it was arranged as something much more profound than when I saw it up front. By taking a step back and looking at the garden and watching him every day, the old retired gentleman that he was, working in his garden, I saw the activity of creation, the beauty of nature, and the simple presence of the Spirit as he created out of nothing this rich garden. My last point. We are told that the Parakletos, the Spirit, will lead us because the Spirit is about truth, and it wants to lead us to total truth. Now, I want you to know that all of us have our truth. All of us are searching for truth as we know it. And let's understand the biblical concept of truth. The biblical concept of truth is that you're honest with yourself, that you see things for what they are, and that's how you make your decisions. And you also open yourself to God, who helps you to look at life as it is, as you are, and what it prompts you to want to become. It isn't just accepting Jesus as Lord and Savior. It's not just trusting God, who always is with you. That's also part of it. But the deeper truth is the ability to be able to see yourself outside of yourself and to know the truth by which you act. And if you know the truth by which you act, you can live with personal integrity. But a lot of us do what we do without knowing why we do it. But when probed by others and asked why you do what you do, suddenly the window of reason opens and we go, "I never thought about that before. So that's why I do what I do. Never thought of that before." You know, modern psychology is based on that principle. Be honest with yourself. See yourself as you are, warts and all, and decide what you want to do with what you have. The kind of life you wish to bear. The kind of life that you would like to be evidence for others. But don't lie to yourself. Don't hide behind pretension. Don't act as though you are this way when you're really not that way at all. Be authentic, genuine, and let the Spirit lead you to a deeper truth. The truth you don't want to see about yourself. That none of us wants to see, because we don't have the courage to see it. But the Spirit of truth will lead us to that point, because all of life and the dialogue we are inflicted by others helps us to wake up and see the reality by which we finally know ourselves for who we are, and by which we can accept who and what we are. So you want to listen? Enter into dialogue and get out of your own echo chamber. Listen to people who are different from you. Watch others as they give their sacrificial compassion. They're telling you something about life, its direction, and its hope. And finally, let the Spirit lead you to face something about yourself you're too terrified to face. Because it is in that moment when you see yourself for who you really are, you are transformed, converted, changed, just like Paul was on his first steps in his ministry to the church. Amen.